named George Eliot, and the Aurora Leigh was this basically a novel in verse form that Elizabeth Barrett Browning wrote, and we read it after we had read Jane Eyre, and I like to do that because it's chronological, but also because a lot of the plot and character elements of Aurora Leigh are quite similar to Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre.
I mean, it sounds like it has all the stuff.
Well, and the funny thing is that we also read this review of Aurora Leigh that George Eliot wrote.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
And she liked the poem, but she called out Elizabeth Barrett Browning for stealing plot points from Jane Eyre. And Elizabeth Barrett Browning later claimed that she did not do that, or at least it wasn't intentional. But she was reading Jane Eyre slightly before she started writing this poem. So,
okay, all right, we're gonna return back to that because I feel like I need to hear more of the plot to decide. So we were at you had told me that there was like Aurora Leigh,
correct,
and she has like dreams of being a poetess.
Yes,
and then she has like a terrible, undermining, mansplaining cousin,
right,
Romney,
correct,
which is like it's a terrible name. Like if I had a cousin, you would want to punch Romney in the face just for having that name.
Yeah, and
he doesn't. He's like a Bernie bro.
Yeah, pretty much.
Because
yeah.
He thinks that instead of having these frivolous ambitions like being a poetess, that she should like work for social change in the world.
Right, and they have this whole like philosophical discussion leading up to his proposal to her about what is the proper way to how should you devote your life to helping the world? Like, should you do it through doing good works and doing charity and doing various other sort of like stuff that Romney wants to do, or should you write? And that's Aurora's position, that poetry itself can like lift people up and makes them see the world in different ways, and therefore that's the way that she wants to contribute to the world.
I can't decide if I find that actually obnoxious or I just find it obnoxious that he says so.
They're both pretty obnoxious. That is one. They're both kind of lofty idealists, and like the whole point is that they just can't see how similar they are to each other until the very end.
So they're kind of both insufferable.
Yes.
But I feel like insufferable in the same way that I was when I was 22 and like still am a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, you're not insufferable. I just agreed with you because I'm trying to be agreeable, and no.
Well, okay. So putting aside their insufferability, so one of Romney's plans really caught my attention because he wants to do like a reform thing in the French style.
Correct.
Which sounds very Bronson Alcott.
Yes.
Right. Have you ever been to the Fruitlands?
No.
So that like in Massachusetts they still have like the farm that he tried to have like the big like utopian society.
Right.
But then really it was just his wife and his daughters doing all the labor. And then like just like wacky men walking all over the place with like good ideas. Like there was a guy who was a vegetarian but also like not doing any kind of actual labor.
Yeah.
So maybe that's where I get my association with like some of these reforms are like pie in the sky by men.
Right.
And then women actually do all the labor. Right.
Well, and that was part of like in the story, part of the way he proposes marriage to Aurora initially is that I want you to be my helper in this great work that I'm going to accomplish. And she's like, no, I have my own vocation. That's a quote.
Right.
Like, I too have a vocation, and it's being a poet. And then he's like, yeah, being a poet is worthless. Like, you're wasting your life by not marrying me.
Awful.
Yeah, it's awful. It's really terrible.
But that is so St. John.
Yeah, it's very St. John. And
because he wants Jane Eyre to go to India.
Yes, exactly.
To be a missionary.
Exactly.
But
yeah, but he's
so cold-blooded.
Yeah, he's kind of like a secular St. John in a lot of ways.
Okay.
So they know each other. Aurora is an orphan, and anyway, so they part ways, and she goes to London to try to pursue her goals of being a poet, and Romney, who owns the family estate, the Leigh estate, of course, uses his family's great country house as the base for this, commune. I don't know what the exact word for it is.
He's putting his money where his mouth is. Right,
and there is a term for it in the poem, which I've forgotten, which is very long and strange, and I always have to explain it to students. Anyway, in the process, he basically like starts recruiting people to be a part of this community. I think mostly from the countryside, like peasants and things. And one of the people who ends up there is this woman named Marion, who is also an orphan. And we get this whole section where she tells her life story and her backstory, which is an interesting kind of parallel to Aurora. And you know, she had abusive parents, and you know, sort of suffered and tried to sort of find work and all this kind of stuff. And she ends up in a hospital, which, as you know, were terrible institutions.
Yes.
In the 19th century.
Yes. Not where I'd want to send my worst enemy.
No. You basically went there to die, right? But she lives, and Romney finds her in the hospital and takes her to his commune, and she is very grateful to him, and is very sort of almost like puts him on this pedestal and sees him as almost like a Christ-like figure in her life. And Romney gets this idea that, my first idea that I was going to marry my cousin Aurora was bad. It failed. So I'm going to marry Marion. And what I'm going to do by marrying Marion, that's really hard to say, marrying Marion, is that, you know, because she's from the lower working classes,
right,
and I'm from the aristocratic upper classes,
right,
I am going to bridge the divide between the classes and heal that wound. And he uses that metaphor of like this gaping wound in society through our marriage. Yes.
The podcast cannot record my facial expression, but there's a lot of side-eye in my facial expression right now.
Yes. And so as a part of this, by this point, Romney and Aurora have kind of reconciled as friends.
Yeah.
And they're still very close, and he still respects Aurora. And so he wants Marion to meet Aurora and become friends, since he's going to marry this young woman. And so Aurora meets Marion, and they have this whole conversation about the impending wedding. And Aurora kind of takes the Jane Eyre position of, you can't marry, you have to marry for love, right? Love has to be a part of it. And she recognizes that Marion does have a sort of love for Romney, but they have such an unequal relationship that they can't have a good marriage.
This is interesting because I feel like that's a little bit of the Miss Fairfax concern.
Yeah.
You know, and when I was a teenager and I read Jane Eyre for the first time, I really, really could not stand Miss Fairfax. I was like, why can't you see their true love and happiness? And now as an adult, I just see like the power play here. And like all three of these characters, these fictional characters, are orphans. Right. Like, you have nobody to advocate for you. You have nobody to tell you, like, you know, you should maybe not put your entire life in the hands of a man who wants, like, a very malleable, young, poor girl.
Right.
So that's interesting that she's both like the Jane Eyre, you know, true love, and also the Miss Fairfax. Like, yeah, but why? Like, the critical thinking of, like, but why? What's the attraction? What's in it for him?
Right.
Because it sounds like neither Ronnie nor Rochester, and I still love Mr. Rochester. Yeah. Always love Mr. Rochester. But it's not like neither of them are ceding any kind of power.
Right. Exactly.
Like,
yeah, like, he's not like giving Marion her own independent fortune before he marries her so that she can be socially equal to him. No. So I should say that on top of all of this, there is another love interest.
Yes, tell me.
And I am ashamed to say I am blanking on her name, but this is why I have to reread things every time I teach them. Yeah. But she's a lady. She has a title, and she is amazing.
Does she have an independent fortune?
She does.
Oh,
and she wants to marry Romney, despite everything. She is in love with him. She wants to marry him, and she thinks that she is the best match for him. And her goal is to basically convince Marion and Aurora. So she goes to Aurora to, like, get Aurora on her side to try to get Marion out of the way, because she wants to marry Romney. And she's the villain of this piece, by the way.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So,
okay.
And I'll get to that in a minute. But she, like, does this very, like, there's this whole speech where she, like, you know, talks down and makes this whole, like, idea, this whole speech about how Marion is like the dirt underneath Romney's feet, and therefore, you know, they can never be together. And, you know, Aurora has already, like, made the case that, yes, there's a power imbalance, and therefore this is not a good basis for a marriage. Yeah. But it's not because she thinks Marion is, like, not valuable as a person. It's because of, you know, the differences in what they have. And this aristocratic lady is like, no, she's just, like, worthless. And so, you know, she should not, like, sully his image or whatever. Anyway, so.
But I could see that because... Like, I'm approaching this very much in terms of, like, gender, because I live in 2017.
Sure,
but
I do too.
That's not a 2017 world.
Right.
And, like, Jane Eyre would never be with Mr. Rochester successfully if she didn't get the inheritance.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I find is actually, we have to spend more time talking about the class system in Britain and when I teach this, because even though, of course, there is, like, still class differences in the world we live in, it's different. And our students, I feel like they often don't come to the table with...
This is every single Mexican soap opera that I ever grew up with. Every single... I mean, when I was in college and we read, like, Siglo de Oro, like, 16th... like, golden century stuff, it was so recognizable to me of... Now I realize a little bit tragically of, like, ideas in class in the Spanish-speaking world haven't really moved forward that much.
Yeah.
And it's still very much, like... You know, if you are, I mean, like, but we have the word in English, like, noble.
Right.
It's still, like, you are a person of virtue.
Right.
And also you are a person of, like, a certain class. But, like, every single Mexican soap opera that I ever grew up with always has to have, you know, in order for either, like, the poor guy with rich girl or rich girl, there always has to be a switched at birth. There always has to be, like, a rich uncle dies and, like, calls it in order for the story to function, because it's still, like, even in, like, soap opera world, it still doesn't ring correct. And like, the thing about those stories is whenever somebody is revealed at the end to have, you know, the hidden fortune, it's embedded in the story that they were always nobler.
Right.
Like, they were always, like, a nicer, better person than their surroundings. So, this Marion character is interesting.
Right.
Because it sounds like she's just straight up poor.
Yeah, she really is. And I think Elizabeth Barrett Browning is trying to sort of push back against those narratives.
By making the noblewoman the villain.
Yes. Yeah. Huh. So, although I'm sure there were I don't think she's, you know, so Elizabeth Barrett Browning is also her family, you know, is not, like, aristocrats, and so there was certainly, like, a strain in the 19th century of like the upper middle class critiquing the landed aristocrats as being you know I don't know,
morally bankrupt.
Yes, thank you. And you know the sort of this degeneracy.
Wait, so who does Romney end up with?
Okay. So, the wedding for Romney and Marion goes forward despite all of this drama, and it's supposed to be this, like, because he wants to marry Marion to heal the social divide between the classes.
Right.
It becomes, like, this huge event, and all of London goes, all of fashionable London, and they invite all of working class London, and so they all arrive at this wedding. And there's lots of, like, the guests, like, talking about, like, you know, oh, these other people are here.
Right.
And then Romney gets up there, and Marion does not arrive.
She's isn't at the altar.
Yes, but nobody knows what's happened to her. Nobody knows where she's gone. And all of the people at the wedding are freaking out and getting really paranoid about what's happened to her, including all of the working class people, because they're like, this rich guy... He's kidnapped her, or he's killed her, or something has happened to her, and the rich people are screwing us over again. And of course, this is like why would we ever trust them? Type of thing.
All this mistrust.
Yeah, and a riot erupts.
At
the wedding.
Wow. Things escalate quickly.
Yes, they do. And so Aurora feels kind of responsible for not doing more to try to help Marion, and really is really just, like, concerned. And Romney also, of course, is concerned about what has happened to her. And so they start searching for her. She's nowhere to be found in London. And they, like, send out, like, search parties and like, private detectives, all kinds of stuff. Anyway, so Aurora eventually goes to Paris.
As one does.
Yeah, she, like, had too much of London and was, like, kind of...
Is she still into poetry?
Yeah, she's still doing poetry. She's, like, sold a poem that, like, got some amount of success. And mostly she's just kind of, like, over London society and is kind of depressed, and so she goes to Paris.
Yeah.
And in Paris, she finds Marion. And after a lot of explanation, she finds out that what happened was this aristocratic villain lady essentially convinced Marion that she was not worthy of Romney, and that therefore, if she really cared for Romney, that she should leave him. And so she...
That's so... Oh,
yes.
That's not nice behavior.
Yeah, and she, like, Marion, like, reports the whole conversation that happened. And so this villain lady, like, pays a very shady woman to take Marion away to France. And basically sells her into sexual slavery. And she gets assaulted. Yes. Sorry, I didn't...
My eyes are bugging out here.
And
poor Marion.
Yes, and it's like, it's really intense. And especially when we get to that part, like, you know, we have to have this whole conversation about it. Especially because it's like it's very euphemistic in the way that they explain what has happened to her.
But it's like, we're in France, but we're now also going into, like, Victor Hugo territory.
Yes. And the reason, part of why we know this is because Marion now has a child.
Oh. Yeah. There's no getting around that.
Right. So, and Marion has sort of, like, is in love with her child and is very devoted to it and is like, this is now going to be my life, is taking care of this child. And Aurora is kind of conflicted because on the one hand, you know, she feels bad that, like, you know, what's happened to Marion and her, she feels like, how have I contributed to getting her here? Of course, she hates this aristocratic lady who, like, sold her to this shady woman.
And the aristocratic lady doesn't end up with Romney either.
No. So anyway, long story short, Aurora decides to take Marion and the baby, and they're going to set up this, like, little family, just the three of them, in Italy.
Oh, nice.
And outside of Florence.
Yeah.
And she's just going to, like, use her royalties from her poetry to take care of Marion and this baby, and, like, they're just going to have, like, their own little family.
Wait, so does she ever communicate to Romney, this is what happened to your fiancé?
She does eventually.
But only after they've been established.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. And basically, like, you know, hey, I found Marion, she's okay. She doesn't mention the baby. And we're going to go to Florence. Have a nice life. So they go to Florence, and then Romney shows up, of course.
Yeah.
And then when he sees the baby, he's like, oh my God. Like, and he gets the whole story, and he's like, okay, so Marion, I will marry you. I'm going to be a father to this child. Like, we're going to be together.
Yeah.
And Marion says, no, like, you know, thank you for coming, and I appreciate what you're doing, but you don't love me. You love Aurora. And so then Aurora and Romney have this, like, reunion, and, I should say,
okay,
this is and this is really the Jane Eyre tie-in. When Romney arrives, they can't originally tell this because it is very dark. It is evening, and they're outside. But part of why he has come to Italy is because his estate burned to the ground.
Don't say it.
Burned to the ground by the people who were living there
in the riot.
Yeah, well, yeah, and they were just angry about, like, how he was treated.
Is he blinded?
He is blinded.
He is not.
He is blinded. Oh. He is blinded, and he arrives, and now that he is blinded and his estate has been burned to the ground. I
plagiarized it.
Yes. But yeah, but now that he's blind and his estate is burned to the ground, he and Aurora can, you know, be equal, and she can be his eyes, and they can...
I was almost sold on Romney. Like, this is me softening towards Romney and on Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and now I'm like, come on.
Yeah. So now as you...
Okay, this is gratuitous. This is gratuitous.
So that's perhaps why George Eliot said, hey, you stole plot elements from Jane Eyre.
I just don't know about this. Well, okay, all right. I have to read this now.
Yeah, it's great.
This is amazing.
Yeah.
Because the plot just has all the things, and
the dialogue is really great. Like,
yeah,
and especially like when the characters are being like, I don't know, really just cutting to each other. And
I think the foreign elements though are really interesting.
Yeah,
because they're like plucked out of England.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned to you earlier, Aurora herself, her mother was Italian, mm-hmm. and her father is English, and there's this whole bit where she almost feels like caught between these two mm-hmm. worlds, and England is this sort of like repressive place, and Italy in her imagination is kind of like wild and free and exciting. And,
well, yeah.
Yeah.
And France is all about moral degradation.
Yeah. But a lot of that, of course, has to do with Elizabeth Barrett Browning's like her own sort of biography, like, so
yeah.
You know, and her sort of escape from England and her mm-hmm. repressive father to Florence, where she felt free.
Well, I mean, Italy is the place.
Yeah, sure.
Like Italy is the place where you're gonna, you know, Lord Byron, Percy Shelley it up.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm still processing.
Sure, that's fair. There's a lot.
I kind of loved all of it up until the his estate burns to the ground. Because in my mind, like, she did the right thing in turning him down to begin with, because he wasn't offering her anything of substance,
right? And
he also wasn't like encouraging her. And like, I could buy in the narrative that, you know, Romney has like growth and mm-hmm. has like come to a better understanding, mm-hmm. and like I could buy into that, but I feel like now that she has established her own household mm-hmm. and is established as a character that not only like is not in need of rescue, but has a lot of agency and can like rescue somebody else,
right?
That makes them equals.
Right.
And him losing the estate and basically becoming somebody else that she has to rescue.
Yeah, yeah. Although, I mean, he still has he doesn't have the estate, so it's kind of unclear, like, what his financial situation is.
Do they end up in Italy, or do they go back to England?
Well, it sort of just ends. Like, they just kind of meet, they decide that they're going to be together, and they have this, like, very... They speak in lots of like metaphors and stuff at the end there, where now that his estate is gone and his whole sort of social experiment failed, he feels like he's kind of come around and realized that poetry can do great things in the world too, and so he is going to support her in her mission,
which is great.
Sure,
but man, there's so much stuff with Mary. The name, Mary, Virgin Mary, girl I'm gonna marry.
Right.
There's a lot.
Right. So I mean, the other angle that's interesting, I think, is this whole the character of Marian, how she is treated and how she's talked about, but also sort of it's one of those things that's always, I feel like, tricky with Victorian novels and stuff. Is like, on the one hand, like, they're trying to like. So it's clear that Elizabeth Barrett Browning is trying to sort of counteract the sort of shaming of the fallen woman, right?
Right.
Because even though this has happened to Marianne, and, you know, she socially she would be a total outcast, right?
Right.
And so there was lots of like novels from this time period of mm-hmm. and normally like the woman, the quote unquote fallen woman who this happened to would like, commit suicide or something really awful. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It was always a tragedy.
Like, she's breaking a taboo and giving a compassionate portrayal of this
Absolutely.
So that's a step.
Yes.
But this is not like a fully enlightened.
No, of course not. We're still Victorians.
We're still Victorian. Yeah. We're still Victorian. Let's not get crazy.
Of course not. Yeah.
But, you know, we didn't kill her off.
Right, and of course, like, you know, the heroine of the story is Aurora. Yeah. Not Marian. Marian's like the foil in some ways.
I mean, do we feel like in modern fiction that Marian gets... Like, are we even now in a place where Marian gets her story?
Probably not.
Like,
I don't know.
I get real judgy about Victorian literature, and then I stop and think about it, and I'm like, but I don't like it's not like we have all these like you know.
No. I mean, this is one of the things that I love and hate the most about like studying literature from this time period is both recognizing things that still seem relevant today. Yes. I love it, but then I'm like, come on, guys.
So it would just be, I think that it would be so heartbreaking for Elizabeth Barrett Browning or Charlotte Bronte to know that those things still resonate. Yeah. To know that, like, you know, the love affair with the guy who's like, but why don't you just support my dreams?
Exactly.
That's something that still resonates. That would be pretty heartbreaking for them. Yeah. But I will never get over my love of this much plot.
That's true.
It's just so good. I think we should end this episode.
Okay.
So let us say goodbye to the nice people.
Bye.
And yeah.